In the year 722 AD, the Umayyad Caliphate stood at the peak of human power. Its banners stretched from the deserts of Arabia to the cold Atlantic edge of Europe. No army had ever expanded this fast, this far. Reports arrived daily, most of them boring: cities surrendering, nobles kneeling, resistance collapsing. Then one report stood out: a pocket of rebels hiding in the wet mountains of northern Iberia, starving, cornered, barely surviving in caves. The governor didn't shout, he didn't panic, he laughed. He dismissed them with a phrase that history would never forgive: 30 wild donkeys hiding in rocks. The decision was simple: ignore them, let winter finish the job. That laugh, that insult, would echo through centuries. The arrogance was earned, or so it seemed. Just 11 years earlier, Muslim forces crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and shattered the Visigothic kingdom in a single violent stroke. At the Battle of Guadalete, Spain's ruling class was wiped out in an afternoon. The king vanished, the nobility died, command collapsed instantly. What followed wasn't a war, it was a cleanup operation. City after city opened its gates: Toledo, Seville, Córdoba. No sieges, no heroic last stands. To the Umayyad commanders, Iberia felt finished. Why waste time on rain-soaked cliffs and forests when richer prizes lay ahead? What the empire saw was math: 300 men versus millions. What they failed to see was who those men were. These weren't peasants, they were survivors of the royal guard, trained soldiers who had watched their world collapse, men with nothing left to lose. They retreated not out of fear, but strategy. They chose terrain cavalry couldn't dominate: narrow passes, vertical cliffs, places where numbers meant nothing. At their center stood a man named Pelayo, not a king, not yet, but a man fueled by memory, humiliation, and revenge. The empire's greatest error wasn't mockery, it was patience. By ignoring the mountains, they gave Pelayo time to organize, time to recruit, time to transform refugees into fighters. While Umayyad officials calculated taxes and planned campaigns deeper into Europe, Pelayo turned valleys into traps and cliffs into weapons. Covadonga wasn't a hiding place, it was a loaded gun, aimed downhill, waiting for someone arrogant enough to pull the trigger. By the time the Umayyads finally decided to act, the wild donkeys were no longer starving, they were ready. And when the empire marched north expecting surrender, it unknowingly stepped into a natural execution chamber carved by mountains and sharpened by hatred. What happened next wasn't just a battle, it was a lesson written in blood and stone. The Islamic conquest of Iberia is often described as an unstoppable invasion. That story is only half true. The truth is darker and far more uncomfortable. Spain did not fall because it was invaded, it fell because it was already rotting. For 3 centuries after Rome collapsed, the Visigothic kingdom ruled Hispania. But by the early 700s, it had become a political slaughterhouse. Kings were not born, they were chosen through violence. Every royal death triggered conspiracies, assassinations, and civil wars. Loyalty meant nothing, power meant everything. The kingdom was a loaded weapon pointed at its own heart. Out of this chaos rose King Roderick, a capable warrior but a political criminal. He seized the throne by force, imprisoning and blinding rivals. Half the nobility despised him. The kingdom didn't unite behind him, it waited for him to fall. That hatred created the opening history needed. Because when enemies exist inside the walls, the gates don't need to be broken, they're opened. Then came Count Julian, governor of Ceuta, the fortress guarding Europe from Africa. His job was simple: stop invasions. But Julian carried a personal wound. According to the most persistent accounts, Roderick dishonored his daughter at court. Julian did not scream, he did not rebel, he calculated. He crossed the ultimate line and made a deal with the rising Muslim commanders of North Africa. He offered them ships. The man guarding the door handed over the keys. It remains one of the coldest betrayals in European history. In 711 AD, Tariq ibn Ziyad crossed the strait with just 7,000 men. Roderick underestimated them. He marched south with a far larger army and met them at Guadalete. On paper, Roderick should have won. In reality, his army betrayed him. Units commanded by rival nobles refused to fight. Some even turned on him. Roderick disappeared into the chaos. His body was never found. Only his white horse and golden boots remained. With the king gone, the Visigoth state died instantly. No heir, no command, no resistance. Among the survivors was Pelayo, a nobleman, likely royal guard, possibly even related to Roderick. He watched betrayal unfold. He watched his kingdom evaporate. Unlike others, he didn't surrender. He retreated north as the Umayyad armies poured across Spain like a flood. Cities fell without resistance. The population adapted. Only a handful refused. Pelayo was one of them, and for that, he became dangerous. Spain didn't fall in a glorious last stand. It committed suicide through betrayal, ambition, and internal decay. And from the ashes of that collapse, one man escaped north, not to hide, but to remember. Because memory, when sharpened by rage, becomes a weapon. After the conquest of Iberia, the Umayyad strategy shifted. The killing slowed. Control mattered more than blood. The conquerors needed local elites alive, visible, and obedient. So they took hostages, sons of nobles, former officers, men whose names still carried weight. Pelayo was one of them. He wasn't thrown into a dungeon. He was brought to Cordoba, the glittering new capital of Al-Andalus. It was a golden cage, marble halls, silk robes, watchful eyes. The message was clear: submit and live comfortably. While Pelayo lived under watch in the south, the north was being conquered quietly. The Umayyad governor of Asturias, Munuza, wasn't a battlefield butcher. He was a politician. His method wasn't slaughter, it was assimilation. Taxes, agreements, strategic marriages. He wanted legitimacy, and legitimacy came from bloodlines. That's when he turned his attention to Pelayo's sister. Whether by force or arrangement, the intent was clear. This wasn't romance, it was erasure. The conqueror planned to absorb the conquered, family by family. When news reached Cordoba that Munuza was moving to claim his sister, something inside Pelayo snapped. The hostage strategy only works if the captive believes survival is enough. Pelayo no longer did. Whatever comfort existed in Cordoba became meaningless. He didn't plot rebellion yet, he plotted escape. How he did it remains unknown. Disguise, bribery, violence, or luck. History only records the result. Pelayo vanished, and then he ran. Pelayo crossed nearly 500 miles of hostile territory, moving through occupied towns and enemy-controlled roads. He wasn't fleeing death, he was racing fate. He reached Asturias too late to stop Munuza's influence, but early enough to challenge it. Pelayo confronted the governor directly, not in secret, not in submission, in defiance. Munuza ordered his arrest. Pelayo fought his way out and fled toward the mountains. Arrows chased him as he crossed the Nalan River, clinging to his horse as water and steel tried to claim him. Pelayo didn't run randomly. He ran to the Picos de Europa, jagged limestone peaks where armies suffocate and locals thrive. As he moved through valleys and villages, something unexpected happened. People followed him. Dispossessed nobles, farmers, young men raised under occupation. They didn't follow a crown, they followed courage. By the time Pelayo reached the high caves, he wasn't alone. The so-called wild donkeys had found their leader. The Umayyads believed the mountains would kill Pelayo for them. Instead, they had just delivered him the greatest fortress in Iberia. For the next 4 years, while an empire slept, a rebellion learned how to hunt. For 4 long years, Pelayo didn't fight a war. He prepared a murder scene. Covadonga was not a castle. There were no walls, no towers, no gates. What Pelayo chose instead was something far more dangerous: geography. The Picos de Europa were not rolling hills, they were vertical blades of stone. Limestone cliffs rose without warning, valleys collapsed into dead ends, and narrow passes strangled movement. Horses stumbled, formations broke, weather shifted without mercy. To outsiders, it was chaos. To locals, it was home. At the heart of this terrain was the Cave of Covadonga, a shallow overhang carved into a cliff face above a narrow valley. It wasn't deep, it wasn't wide, but it was perfectly positioned. Any force entering the valley would be compressed into a tight column. Only a handful of men could fight at once. Numbers would pile up behind them, useless and trapped. Pelayo understood something his enemies didn't. In tight spaces, size becomes a weakness. In 722 AD, the Umayyads finally acted. The rebellion had lasted too long. General Al-Qama was sent north with a force meant to end the problem permanently. Chroniclers exaggerated the numbers, tens of thousands, maybe more, but the exact figure didn't matter. Even 10,000 men would be catastrophic inside that valley. Al-Qama expected submission. He brought a bishop, Opis, a collaborator meant to talk sense into Pelayo. The empire still believed this was a negotiation. Opis rode forward beneath the cave and called out. He spoke calmly, logically. He offered Pelayo survival, wealth, and authority as long as he submitted. His argument was simple. If an entire kingdom failed, how could a handful of men succeed? For a moment, silence hung in the valley. Then Pelayo answered, not with tactics, but belief. He declared that from this small mountain, salvation would rise. It was not a speech, it was a refusal to accept reality as permanent. Al-Qama listened, scoffed, and gave the order. Archers and slingers moved forward. The plan was routine: suppress the cave, storm the slope, end the rebellion. The first volley of arrows flew upward, and that's when reality broke. The cave wasn't a tunnel, it was a stone overhang. Arrows struck rock, shattered, and came back down. What the chronicles called a miracle was simple geometry. Panic rippled through the front ranks, and in that moment, Pelayo struck. The empire had just fired on itself, and while confusion spread like fire, the mountains moved, because the men in the cave were only the bait. The moment the arrows rebounded, the Umayyad front line froze. Soldiers raised shields instinctively, confused by wounds coming from above, from their own weapons. Commands were shouted, then drowned out. The tightly packed formation, once disciplined and terrifying, became fragile. In a narrow gorge, hesitation is fatal. Pelayo had waited years for this exact second. He didn't need to shout orders. The land itself carried the signal. From the cave and forest edges, Pelayo's men surged forward, not in perfect ranks, but like a landslide. These weren't parade soldiers. They were hunters, farmers, survivors. They knew every rock and root. Steel flashed, axes swung. The psychological shock was immediate. An army that expected surrender was suddenly being attacked from above, the sides, and the front. The insult came back to haunt them. The wild donkeys kicked hard. But the charge was only the beginning. High above the valley, hidden in fog and trees, Pelayo's true weapon waited. For days, villagers had loosened boulders and tree trunks, stacking them at the cliff edges. When the signal came, the mountains answered. Stone and timber crashed downward. There was no room to dodge, no room to scatter. The gorge became a meat grinder. Horses screamed, shields shattered. Men were crushed without ever seeing an enemy. In the chaos stood General Al-Qama, trying to restore order. To his credit, he didn't flee. He fought, attempting to carve space for his men. But a general in a gorge is just another target. Surrounded, overwhelmed, and cut off, Alcama fell, struck down by the very fighters he had dismissed as insignificant. When word spread that the commander was dead, the army's spine snapped. The retreat was worse than the fight. Men tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Reinforcements pressed forward, unaware the front had collapsed. The valley choked itself. Soldiers were trampled by their own ranks. Discipline evaporated. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was extermination. Years of humiliation poured out through Asturian blades. The river below ran dark, carrying more than water. By sunset, the invincible army was shattered. Those who survived ran east, desperate to escape the mountains. They believed the nightmare was over. The survivors of Covadonga didn't regroup. They scattered. Leaderless, exhausted, and half-mad with fear, the remnants of the Umayyad force fled east through the high passes of the Picos de Europa. Their goal was simple: escape the mountains. They believed flat land meant safety. Roads meant survival. What they didn't understand was that in these peaks, retreat can be deadlier than advance. The mountains don't forgive panic. The escape route led through Koskaya, a narrow corridor carved between unstable slopes and a raging river. Rain had soaked the limestone. The ground groaned under thousands of boots and hooves. Whether from weather, vibration, or fate, the mountain gave way. Without warning, the slope collapsed. It wasn't just falling rocks, it was the land itself sliding downward. Soldiers vanished beneath stone and mud. Horses screamed, then disappeared. The earth sealed shut. Chroniclers would later claim tens of thousands died. Medieval numbers exaggerate, but the truth remains brutal. The expedition ceased to exist. No units returned south, no officers reported, no banners came back. An entire army marched into Asturias and vanished. This wasn't a defeat, it was a disappearance. To the Umayyad governors in the south, the silence from the north was terrifying. The destruction created something more powerful than victory, a psychological wall. Asturias became cursed ground. Raids would come later, but no serious attempt at conquest followed. The cost was too high. The mountains had eaten an army. For Pelayo, this meant security, time, breathing room. The impossible had happened. A permanent frontier formed between empire and resistance. While the army died in the mountains, Governor Munusa waited in Gijón. He expected victory. Instead, rumors arrived. Whispers of slaughter, collapsing cliffs, and a leader who couldn't be killed. Munusa understood immediately. The countryside had changed. Fear was gone. Hope had replaced it. He gathered his gold, his guards, and fled south. He never made it. Pelayo intercepted Munusa on the road. There was no negotiation, no mercy. With the governor dead, Asturias was free. But victory created a new question. What do rebels become when the enemy is gone? When the dust settled, silence filled the mountains. For the first time in over a decade, Asturias had no enemy banners on its soil. The men who once hid in caves gathered again, not as fugitives, but as victors. There was no cathedral, no golden throne, no foreign blessing. Instead, they followed an ancient Visigothic tradition older than Rome itself. They raised Pelayo onto a shield and proclaimed him king. Not king of Spain, king of survival. The kingdom of Asturias was born, small, poor, but unbroken. Pelayo understood something crucial. He could not defeat the Umayyad Caliphate head-on, so instead of expanding recklessly, Asturias became defensive genius in motion. His successors weaponized emptiness itself. The lands south of the mountains were deliberately emptied, crops burned, towns abandoned, people relocated north. Historians call it the Desert of the Duero. It was a vast buffer zone of nothingness. Any invading army would starve before reaching the mountains. Behind the mountains and deserts, Asturias became an ark. It preserved what the rest of Iberia lost: Christian identity, Visigothic law, and Roman tradition. Churches were built like fortresses. Culture survived where empire couldn't reach. Refugees from the south arrived with knowledge, skills, and memory. What began as resistance evolved into identity. The wild donkeys had become wolves. The Umayyads made a calculation. Asturias wasn't worth the blood. They turned east and north instead, toward France. 10 years later, that same arrogance would cost them again at Tours. Asturias was left alone. It grew quietly. By the 9th century, it expanded south. The Reconquista had shifted from survival to slow revenge. Pelayo died peacefully in 737 AD, something rare for a man like him. But his true legacy wasn't his crown. It was the chain reaction he started. The war he ignited would last nearly 800 years, the longest conflict in human history. Without Covadonga, there is no Asturias. Without Asturias, no León, no Castile, no Portugal, no Spain. And without Spain, no 1492, no Columbus, no reshaping of the modern world. Today, the cave of Covadonga stands silent. Water falls, stone endures. Inside rests a simple tomb. No palace, no empire. Just proof that history doesn't always bend to power. Sometimes it bends to refusal. And the lesson is terrifyingly simple. As long as even one mustard seed of resistance survives, the story is never over. If this single cave reshaped the world, what other forgotten moments are hiding in history?